Hey everybody, I'm Eric, and
I'm Justin.
we're co-founders of Sonic Bloom, and we try to cover game audio related stuff from being inside the industry itself, as well as some just general industry news. And our whole shtick is that we like to try to give you our take from an industry insider perspective as to what all of this stuff means. We're going to keep it laid back and fun, and hopefully weekly. We've actually been pretty good about that so far.
Minus technical issues.
Yeah, well, hopefully those are slowly getting ironed out.
Yep.
So,
I just like
you know,
mildly, I lose more hair just before these things,
every time.
and my blood pressure shoots straight up. So that's what I got before every one of these things.
Yeah. So we're also going to hopefully be inviting some guests to come and chat with us, specifically about kind of the game industry from their perspective, and in particular, as best we can, game audio related stuff. Because we think that's kind of an underserved area within games itself and is ripe for bringing interesting kind of ideas and thoughts to the forefront.
Yeah. Who needs to focus on graphics anymore? They already look
Right.
photoreal.
Yeah.
So let's talk
Now we're
about audio.
yeah.
Yeah.
But speaking of, we're going to talk about graphics in this a little bit.
It's the thing that keeps advancing like every month.
Yeah. Right.
But so
It's
that
also sells because it's very visual and easy to slap on an image on a web page and say, "See."
yeah, it's actually one of the problems that we always run into. Every time we try to show off the tech that we're working on, it's just like, can you give us a screenshot? You're like, no, it's audio. The screenshot does nothing. So
Yeah.
it's a fun problem to have, I guess.
Yeah.
Um,
Or some definition of fun.
yeah. Cool. We can jump, I guess, straight into news, maybe, unless
News for
there's
the
anything
week.
else to cover. Nah, let's just go straight to news for the week.
Do it.
Do you want to cover the first one?
No, you go. You start.
Come on, you love Nintendo.
I do love Nintendo, but like half of this stuff is Nintendo this week. So
Yeah,
kick it off.
well, we've been actually kind of avoiding. This goes into the first topic, so this is a weird segue. But basically, I've avoided trying to comment on rumors in general because it's just like you can't substantiate them. But they keep mounting for the Nintendo Switch Next, whatever they're gonna call it.
Pro or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't have an official name. It's not even officially acknowledged by Nintendo yet. But basically, there's like bits and pieces that are real. They're just not directly attributed to Nintendo, but basically, people are putting the pieces together and going, this sure looks like things are changing in the direction of some sort of next gen version of Switch. And so we can talk about a couple of those rumors, and then we can talk about what's Nintendo's strategy here, because I think there's actually more meat to that, which is like, where does this fall in with the given success of the Switch, and whatever their positioning is there. So do you want to talk about a couple of the rumors, or do you want me to go over them?
I'll start with the first one, and that is that they're creating an OLED panel, or they're going to be using an OLED panel, a bigger one, technically 7-inch. The current panel it's like 6.2 or 6.4 inches in size. In fact, I have it right here. Do I have it right here? Yeah, 6.2-inch LCD. So they're going to switch to a 7-inch, or the rumor is that they will switch to a 7-inch OLED panel, which will give them more vibrant colors, cut down on
Power usage.
battery power usage, yeah. And will generally produce a more pleasant experience, as it will be bigger. Now, the resolution, according to the latest rumor, the resolution won't change. It's going to be the same that you have right now. So the pixels will be fatter. You'll just have a larger screen space, which I have to admit, having played mobile Switch, it is a nice thing to have, is that extra area. You're not sitting there like staring at it with your face trying to make out details in HD content on a tiny screen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that the interesting thing here is that, especially with the rigid OLEDs, they've been produced for phones. They've been produced for a handful of smaller uses, including watches, and obviously laptops and full size TVs. But basically, the cost to produce not the highest end in rigid OLEDs has gone down significantly. So it makes sense that Nintendo could pursue this as something for their next gen Switch, not only specifically for the power savings, but also because they tend to be a price conscious company. They're not trying to put the most cutting edge thing out there. They're trying to create like the most value for the money. And if there's a cheap OLED available produced at the volumes that they need, then I think they would jump at it.
Yeah, I think the last time they did something that seemed to be relatively expensive and took like a an expensive approach to developing hardware was the N64.
Yeah,
where they built with silicon graphics technology, which was a relatively small company at the time and big in the graphics industry, but that industry was small. And since then, like the GameCube, when the GameCube was announced, everything was hyper optimized. They talked about like the 1T memory transistors or whatever, which were supposed to be cheaper and faster for what you would get. And everything has been about cost cutting. And I think there was even a period where Nintendo had a thing where they never used the hardware as a loss leader.
Starting with the Wii. The Wii, they lost money on the GameCube, but starting with the Wii.
Right.
Well, I can roll back here. The GameCube lost the money, and it lost them a lot of money. And with that, they sort of learned some lessons, which is basically if you're going to lose money on the consoles and you're not selling enough software, you've got a real problem on your hands because basically, one or two software. Yeah, pretty much. It's like they make $10, $15 on every game sold. But if they're losing $50 on the console, then they need to sell 3 or 4 copies of the game. And the GameCube didn't really do that. People bought it, but people weren't buying games. Stuff sat on shelves. So basically they lost money during that period. I think it was the only time in Nintendo's history, or it was the first time in Nintendo's history where they actually posted a loss. And they quickly changed that, where the Wii was the first console that on day one, I think they were making a profit on the console for every unit sold.
Yeah. And they've endeavored to keep that up. As I understand it, I could be wrong on the exact details, but that's been my read of it. And in this case, cutting costs of, there are non-rigid OLED panels which are more expensive, so they're going for the ones that are right for their kind of segment. If this rumor turns out to be true, now part of the reason that this is good timing and the reason that this rumor seems to make sense is because there's also the rumor, which is based on supply chain data, that the Nintendo Mariko chip, the NVIDIA X1, I believe, the Tegra X1, X1 Plus or something like that, which is the system on a chip core processor package that powers the Switch. NVIDIA's going to stop making them this year in 2021. Which means that Nintendo could go out and buy like a huge allotment of them and then have like slowly leak them or, sell them out over the next couple of years. But it's almost more likely going to be the case that they'll go with whatever the next available compatible chipset will be, so that they can give everybody a bit of a spec bump. And if NVIDIA's prices have come down into be, somewhat relatively parity with the Mariko chip, then maybe that makes sense. Now we have, again, like another cheapish mobile chip that's now had 5 years of advances over the original.
Right.
That's going to have more bells and whistles. Now the rumors say that it should be able to handle 4K TV output, paired with the new panel, the new LCD or OLED panel that's being rumored, would mean that you'd still have. By the way, that OLED panel would be another 720p panel.
Right.
Which is the same resolution again that we have now. So you wouldn't really be getting any extra oomph on the mobile screen front. But at 7 inches, does it really matter?
No, I mean,
see it?
Right. And basically it probably cuts down on performance or battery usage when off power, so that they can maintain like a good playing experience off charger.
That's a good point. They could, for the same software running, they can theoretically, with a much more powerful system, they could potentially shut down entire cores of the package.
Right. And I think the fair thing to say is that even if whatever the next gen Tegra chip that they would be using, or whatever the next gen chip will B
Yeah.
that may end up in this new Nintendo console is it's going to be, even if it can output 4K, it's certainly not going to be rendering natively at 4K, or very unlikely at the sort of graphics that people come to expect. So in all likelihood, they're using some sort of computational upscaling anyways, and you're not going to be running native anyways.
Yeah, and to be fair, who knows what NVIDIA is doing, but there was at least one article out there where they were kind of wondering if whatever NVIDIA's next package could include some version of DLSS to handle full blown upscaling from, some 540p up to 4K. Part of the problem, my understanding, and Justin, maybe you know better or different than I do, but my understanding is that the DLSS solution has to be extremely customized for any given game, because it looks at high quality renders of the game in different scenes, and it has to do all of that. You basically have to hand it a massive playthrough at a high frame rate so that it can see at least, or I don't know, maybe not a high frame rate, but it has to be able to see all of the game, so that when you hand it a lower resolution image, it knows, oh, I know what this is supposed to look like, and it fills in the blanks. That's my understanding. Does that track?
Yeah, no, I mean the DLSS system, however it is, I think you have to submit a game for use, and it's doing something like that because we know it's a machine learning algorithm. It has to take sample data and learn from the sample data to do the upscaling effectively, or the upsampling effectively, and all that means that there's a sort of submission process.
If you're hearing some joyful tunes coming out of our stream right now, that would be the ice cream truck that is driving by Justin. Justin, what do you say? You're going to get some ice cream?
I'm spending my time muting myself so you don't have to hear whatever Pop Goes the Weasel while an ice cream truck drives by.
Oh, I want to hear it though. Yeah. So, what do you think about these rumors? Does it feel like Nintendo to have this kind of cycle, or what's they ring true to you?
What was the question again? I'm sorry.
Sorry. Do the rumors that we've covered, do they ring true
for me?
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a lot of truth to it. Basically, it's like they're not far-fetched. There's a lot of far-fetched rumors out there, like what the thing's going to be able to do. But if you look at it and go, okay, the next Tegra chip could be, or Tegra chip should be able to do DLSS super sampling. That makes sense. The fact that they're talking about winding down the chip manufacturing, that makes sense because it's already 4 years old, 5 years old now. That the Tegra chip they're using is a 5-year-old piece of hardware.
Yep.
And the OLED makes sense too, because if Nintendo's looking to cut down on power consumption, then that's a good way of doing it. So like it all makes sense. These are the least crazy things, and I think it wouldn't be surprising that you'd find all three of these things as part of the next hardware.
Right.
I swear this ice cream truck is just sitting out of the corner.
I want to be streamed.
It's doing something. I kind of want to get a Choco Taco now, though. So.
You should take a break.
I know. I just book it and come back with a Choco Taco in my hands.
Yeah. In this week's episode, we're gonna eat ice cream.
Yeah, it's gonna be one of the, what do they call that? Why am I blanking on that? ASMR. Yeah, ASMR video of me smacking around on some ice cream.
Just get really close to the microphone. I'm sorry, I won't do that again.
I'm going to start doing that now. This is now an ASMR channel.
ASMR games. That's how I'm gonna do it. The new hit. I think this feels to me very much right up Nintendo's alley. When you look at not necessarily for their consoles like the Wii or the Wii U, the two most recent other than the Switch itself, but more their handhelds, right? Like we had the Nintendo DS, and then we had the DS Lite, and then we had the 3DS, and then we had the 3DS XL, and then we had the 2DS, and all of those. The thing about this is none of this seems like it's going to break backwards compatibility no hints here that this is a whole new system. This isn't like the generation jump that people were talking about for the Wii U to the Switch. This is seemingly a mid-cycle spec bump, which we have seen before from Nintendo and from the other major console players more recently as well. So I suspect that if Nintendo does this, that they will require that all games created for this machine will still be compatible with the Nintendo Switch that exists today. And we're not going to see a sea change or suddenly like Switch Pro only, though that, who knows, that could be a thing.
I mean,
like
here's the thing is that Nintendo does have a history of doing that though, right? Like the whole thing is that given Switch's success, to force that now would seem like a terrible idea, because basically you're saying, hey, I know we've been having record sales this year in the past year, in part due to COVID or whatever, but by the way, all those are now obsolete. If you don't get V2, you're not going to be able to play the latest games.
To all of our fans that we just gained over the last pandemic year, your stuff is obsolete. Start over.
Right, and it just seems unlikely. But the other thing too, again, like we were talking about, where it's like if 4K isn't running natively, 4K is actually just part of the
upscaling output.
Right, and then you're generally rendering at the same resolutions you've been rendering for the old version of the Switch, maybe at higher frame rates, or like with maybe like a handful of new like add-on graphics tweaks that you can get away with. Then maybe.
Yeah.
But
given that it's only been that few years, and hardware cycles this current generation tend to go 7-ish plus, so it's a little bit weird, although given it may be that they're trying to make it a little bit more of a gradient, but who knows.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the smartest thing to do is have like a fully backwards compatible machine, have a brand new hardware spec. New games will have to take advantage of the new hardware spec, but they'll have to be able to run on the old chipset, and basically you'll have sort of like a mid upgrade. But I think it'll be different than like the sort of upgrade we got between PlayStation 4 and PS Pro, which was mostly just a resolution and frame rate bump. I think this is more likely to be like a new graphic advancements, because mobile chip design is advancing significantly faster than desktop architecture, and therefore like the 4 years of generation maybe on a desktop class chip you're not seeing huge advances, but on the mobile side you're seeing huge changes. So
yeah, that's fair.
All right, well, like we've talked Nintendo a lot, so let's keep talking about Nintendo and their sales.
Right, yeah.
Good
month for everybody in the games industry, hardware wise, for
I don't know
February.
About that, because we like Microsoft stopped reporting sales data.
They did, but VG Charts still has information there for somehow. It might be related to like supply chain.
Yeah, I think we get retailer reports that may or may not, and most of the retailer reports are like what's in inventory or what has like historically been in inventory.
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't think it doesn't account for things that are sitting on shelves, or it does account for things that are sitting on shelves but not sold.
According to those numbers, it looks like to date, I don't know about the month of February, but the numbers that I remember to date were like basically PlayStation 5 line had hit 6 million consoles, and the Xbox Series S and X are sitting somewhere at around just under 4 million, so like 3.97 million or something. So 6 million to 4 million, both are doing very, very well for brand new consoles, considering a chip shortage, and they're still all sold out. Like that's how many months later are we now? We're 4 months past launch.
Yeah, something like that, and we're still dealing with shortages. So yeah,
it was like early November, right? So that would be 5 months. Was it early mid? It was like November 12th. Mid.
No, I think. Well, I think Xbox was a week before Sony, or no, was it?
Yeah, it was like 12th and 19th or something.
I don't even remember.
Yeah,
all so last year was a blur.
Yep. I mean, and given today's the 18th or something, right? Yeah. So if today's the 18th, then we'll call it. It's been 4 months, 5 months.
Nintendo's selling as many as they care to. you can walk into a store and find them, but basically,
Yep.
they they're like creeping up on their all-time sales amount. Like, so I guess a couple things to go over is
dollar sales.
Dollar sales, yes, because unit sales I think is the 3DS, but dollar sales is the Wii as the top.
Wii being more expensive than the 3DS for the majority of its life.
Right. 3DS I think was priced at what, $200, $250
Something
maybe
like
at
that,
the beginning.
Yeah. At the beginning, and it came down.
Yeah. So now, you know, so basically unit sales, they might be able to topple the 3DS. It depends if you know, it depends if they're able to carry over the lineage with this like next console.
This refresh, whatever they're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dollar sales, they're inches away from the Wii at this point. So,
which is big, because we made them a lot of money back in the day.
Ish. It made them a lot of money and then didn't make them a lot of money. So
right. I mean, with the Wii U, that
they had a weird roller coaster ride with that console. But anyways,
you could say, like, since we don't know what's coming after this, there could be another dip after this where it would be more roller coaster.
There could be, but they specifically addressed this in one of their investor calls, which was basically like, we learned from the Wii U, and that was a bad idea to do a like essentially a gating product. Like, we had the installed base on the Wii U, and then we updated to, or we had the installed base on the Wii, we updated the Wii U and alienated anybody that was on the Wii, and that was a bad idea. All the more reason to believe that, like, whatever the next Wii or Switch console is likely to have full backwards compatibility and vice versa. So, like, games that are released to it will likely be playable on both. So
yeah, I mean, it gives us developers, you know, more reason to continue to build for that platform. It's always a tough sell to get people to get on a new platform, especially early on, because you're like, you know, right now, if you're targeting PS5 only, then you're targeting 6 million potential players, and not everyone's going to be a fan of your style of game. Whereas if you target a PlayStation 4 owner, you're suddenly at, 70 million more install base. It's way bigger.
Yeah, I don't remember what's at, but
have to look it up. I think it may have broken 100 million, but whatever. Regardless, it's a lot more, and that's kind of part of the calculus of, like, which platform am I targeting. It would be great if we could just say, everybody target the new fanciness because it's really cool, and we'd love to do all the new bells and whistles and things in it. But there is the reality of money that has to come into this.
Yeah.
And you know, kind of sets certain bounds.
Yeah. Well, at least, or adds overhead, basically. It's like, even with all the fancy new engines that are like, hey, you can take something that's built in Unreal and put it to like 8 different, you know, hardware platforms. Just because you can with the engine doesn't mean it runs well on each one. You typically have to do testing and optimizations for every platform that you release to.
Yeah, and
which
then
for a small developer can be prohibitive, right? Like, that's why you'll see like indie strike deals with Nintendo or with PlayStation or Microsoft to be like, let's do a month of sales for free.
Exclusivity.
The partial exclusivity agreements, all this other stuff that puts money in their pocket to essentially fund the development to get it out on more platforms.
Yeah, I mean, part of the another challenge that doesn't come up frequently unless you have been in the industry or know what, you know, have worked on games that have released on particularly multiple platforms is a lot of the times you have checks that you have to go through. You know, with Nintendo and Microsoft and Sony in particular, people know about the asset store. You submit and you get rejected. The same thing happens on Nintendo, Microsoft, and Sony. They all have their own processes. They all have they're called TRCs or TCRs, depending on the company. That's either Microsoft or Sony, and then they have other stuff for Nintendo. And, you know, clearing all of those is each its own individual battle.
Yeah. Yep.
So,
I could talk about that for a while. And hey, if anybody wants to know what the submission process is like for Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft, let us know if you want to hear about that.
Yeah, we can talk about that.
Oh, there's stories I could go over, and like,
not like more of those.
I guess the other piece of news here was that PS5 is the fastest selling console in terms of dollar sales in North America.
Yeah. Which isn't, I mean, it's also one of the most expensive. It's still not as expensive as the PS3 was when it launched. I mean, especially adjusting for inflation.
Yes. whereas the PlayStation 3 came in at $500 and $600. This
Yeah.
comes in at 400 and then the PS4 came in at 400 even.
Yeah.
Yeah, but either way, it's the demand hasn't gone down. They're selling, the digital and the non and the disc version, and basically, it's the fastest selling console so far. In February, it was the highest ever revenue month reported, and it was
Across all the sales.
console or video game sales
Right.
was up to 4.6 billion
In the month of February?
Yeah.
Jesus.
I mean, to be fair,
Why February?
well, I think it's mostly because like the hardware is still in demand. So basically, the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox and the Switch are all selling in large amounts altogether. Switch, because it's just generally people want to get a hold of it. It's spreading word of mouth. There's a bunch of good games for it, and people are stuck inside, and maybe can't use their TV because now like 5 people in their household might be trying to use the TV. So it's a good way to get Timmy away from the TV. But yeah, plus the ongoing like high demand for Xbox and PlayStation. I guess they said it's 35% higher than it was last year. So that's a pretty big jump.
Yeah.
Granted,
And that would
it's still in like semi-COVID isolation. So
very true.
yeah. All right. I guess 2 more bits of news. This probably doesn't have much to go over, but I think there's probably 1 or 2 interesting bits in there. But Jade Raymond, which you may or may not know, I know Eric, you know who she is, but she was a big name a couple of years ago. She's setting up a new Montreal-based studio, and she's going to be making, or with her team, is going to be making a Sony exclusive title. And I think that's the interesting part. I'll go in a bit more about who Jade Raymond is. She's illustrious career in game development. Her like big step out role was Assassin's Creed, when she announced Assassin's Creed.
Executive producer or some. I think it might have been an executive. It was a producer role. I think it was executive producer.
Yeah. And she was the one up on the E3 stage talking about it at length. So big stuff there. And during the height of, I guess, Assassin's Creed love, maybe. I don't know how much has changed. I'm certainly worn out from that series, but 1 and 2 people are pretty hyped up for it, and she was on that team during that time.
Yeah.
So then she moved on to what? Did we determine it was Stadia first, or was it EA?
Yeah. It was Stadia first. So she bopped around basically between Konami, Ubisoft, and EA, and then in 2017, I believe, joined up with Google, or started working on a secret project, and eventually it came out that she had joined Google to help work on Stadia, until last month, when Google, I think it was last month, maybe even a couple weeks ago, but basically Google said, we're not doing our own Stadia teams anymore. Bye. And they shut down their internal studios, where she left, and now was like a month or less than a month later has announced that she's starting up her own studio and will be working on Sony exclusive stuff.
Yeah. I think the interesting thing to talk about is like the sort of strategizing here, like in becoming a Sony exclusive, and I think there's probably, I guess the best way I would say it, smart positioning. A, she has the name and clout behind her. B, there's probably a lot of opportunity to appeal to Sony right now for exclusives. Obviously Microsoft's been like hoovering up studios, for better or for worse. Like we'll see how this turns out. Sony has a long history of really solid internal studios and really solid game development internally. My guess is this is an interesting posturing where it's going, hey, we talked to Sony. I'm starting the studio. In part, they're going to fund the startup costs of this for us to develop our first game, ship it under the tutelage of Jade Raymond and her vast experience, and then if this goes well,
Right.
there's probably an opportunity somewhere in there where this studio could eventually be consumed by Sony and become a first party studio, as has happened with Insomniac, as has happened with Naughty Dog, as has happened
Yeah.
with any handful of their
Is
second
Santa
party
Monica
studios.
that way, or did Santa Monica start up as a Sony studio? Sony Santa
I
Monica.
think Santa Monica was originally. I think
Was it something else?
it had different names, but I think it's just been like, hey, we had this Sony studio in Southern California, and now we're moving it over to Santa Monica. It's officially becoming Santa Monica, but like basically where God of War was developed, and like Twisted Metal, I think has always been the same studio. Yeah, basically my whole thing was it's smart of Jade Raymond to do this. I think it gets her capital to start the studio,
Oh
uh,
yeah.
get something
Yep.
there. And if they're good, if they're creating like solid content, there's probably an opportunity then which they could be snapped up by Sony and become an internal studio.
Yep.
Last bit of news. This is a long one, I guess. I guess we're doing a lot of news today. Do you want
Yeah.
to go over the last piece?
Yeah, it sounds like Sony has announced and shown off now their new VR controllers for the PlayStation 5 generation of PSVR, which they look pretty spherical, is I guess a way of putting it. Streamlined is another way to do it. They're very much less in the vein of the PS Move controllers from the last gen, and more in the vein of the Valve Index or the Rift controllers. They kind of have hand guards, it looks like, and you kind of stick your hands inside of them. And yeah, it's they're definitely fascinating and look interesting to hold. I'm not really sure what they give. I know that they now have two buttons, and I think that was the thing I first mentioned when I saw them, Justin.
Yeah.
Was, oh, what? There's only two face buttons. They have like the X and circle buttons on the right controller and the square and triangle buttons on the left. And then they have, like the L1, R1, and then the L2, R2 triggers. That's the interesting thing, I guess, that they mentioned, is that they're going to have the adaptive triggers the way that the DualSense does. And then there was something else that I didn't quite understand about finger positioning, where it would sense the positions of your fingers on the controller, something like that. Did you pick up on what that was?
Yeah. Basically, I mean, this is actually present in the Valve
Index
controllers. But basically, they have capacitive touch sensors on a handful of buttons. So basically, these three fingers can all be sensed as to whether or not they're being held on the trigger, not being pressed down, but touching the triggers or touching the buttons that's respected to them. So basically, if your fingers are off of it, it knows that you're no longer touching the triggers, and it assumes that you're making this sort of hand shape. So it's good for like the pickup idea that you get from in Valve's controller, where it's like, oh, you can manipulate stuff in VR, and it's basically because it knows whether or not you're touching the buttons at the time.
Pinching, yeah, yep.
Yeah, so
Okay.
my read on it is like they've looked at the better controllers of what's available now, and it's just like picked and choose, and they've created like here's everything that works on these controllers that work well, and we're getting them all into our VR controller. So now the VR controller is as competitive or more competitive than anything that's currently out on the market, because it combines like the best of features there.
Yeah.
Well, I think actually there was one interesting point to this, was that they've given up on their old method of tracking, which was like using an RGB camera in stereo to track colored orbs on a controller. And if you have a PS5, you may notice that like the light bars exist, but they don't point at anything. They point up. And they just mentioned that the VR helmet is the thing that's able to track the controllers. So like I think it's the Oculus controllers do this too. So basically the helmet has a sensor in it. There's some sort of infrared LED on each controller, and they're not visible to the naked eye, but basically they ring the inner loop that goes around your wrist, and then the helmet itself can see where the position of the controller is. And it looks like this is likely the case. That's why the PSVR, or that's why the PS5 DualSense controller has lights pointing up opposed to out.
Makes sense.
Yeah. The real question is going to be is like, well, how do you track helmet in 3-dimensional space? If they're going to use something like the Vive, where they have the lighthouses that
the room space or something.
Yeah, that we don't know yet. I don't know if there's going to be a camera. Who knows what. Yeah. But something will happen. That's usually the end of our news segment. We will go right into talking about our topic of choice, which is game audio and any cool things that are happening in game audio. Again, it tends to be slow news, so we don't have a lot of like specific stuff to handle, but we kind of want to do I wanted to talk about it. I made up the topic, so Eric has to talk about these. But it's basically music games have like this long history of like becoming big hits, then kind of going quiet for a while, and we have like basically like DDR was big, Rock Band or Guitar Hero was big, Rock Band was big, and now Beat Saber is also big. And these are games that like will sell huge amounts, and in between there'll be other rhythm games. Basically, they don't peak, but it seems like music games are like the perennial genre that like keeps finding new ways to reinvent itself. But every time it does, it gains like this huge following, be it because there's a new platform or something else. And kind of wanted to talk a bit about this. Why? What's the appeal to these music rhythm games? What do they have in common? Eric, do you want to sort of talk about this?
I mean, I think just to start, people like music games and rhythm games in particular because, well, the ones that get big because of how they feel. There is something very euphoric and to some extent cathartic about playing a game and being in time, in kind of a harmonious time, let's say, with a performance with which you're familiar, especially with one with you're familiar and you already like already. So getting access to that experience, and in particular, I'm reminded of the first time that I played Guitar Hero once or twice and was like, yeah, this is pretty cool. Like I get the feeling of being a guitar hero, like the rock on when you do the like lift the guitar and whatever for what's that mode called? Superstar mode or whatever.
Star mode on Guitar Hero. Yeah,
I think. But then you end up with the first time that I played Rock Band was actually at Harmonix in the Star Chamber, which is they had this little room that you could go into. It was like a demo room that they would show people for the press. Justin worked there at the time. I didn't. He signed me in as a guest, and I got to go into basically just that room and play test an earlier version of the game. And wow, playing like it felt like you were in a band. And for someone who'd never been in a band, but enjoyed singing in the car and whatever, and never, I don't know how to play an instrument, but getting to feel like I was playing an instrument, that was just something that was just crazy. And there are elements of that, and being in the rhythm and being in the music, it's like you're becoming part of it. And I personally feel that is an experience that we just like to have and like to relive. Now it can also get a little bit old, and you can overdo it, just as with anything, right? Everything in moderation to an extent, but you can get to the point where you're like, okay, I've done that. What's next? Like, what's the new thing, the new hot, what's the new way to experience this? So I think there's always a period of one of these things strikes a nerve with a huge amount of the population and it takes off. And there's another piece of this that feeds into that, which is the music industry and how willing the commercial music industry, like the big labels and everybody, are willing to work with you as a game developer to put their music in your game.
And at what cost, for that matter.
Yep. And that right there to me is like one of the biggest, hardest pieces to get right in the music industry. Sorry, in the music games genre, let's say.
Yeah. I actually want to sort of come back to one of your points, which is like the feel. And what's sort of what works with that is that I think fundamentally, I mean, they're arcade games, right? They're fundamentally arcade games where it's
Yeah.
just like you try to it's score attack. You try to beat your last
Yep.
score or you try to beat someone else's score. Um, but what works really well for this, and what I think it has over certain other arcade games, is that most arcade games is like Mega Man or whatever else is like memorizing a pattern and then going through that pattern. The music games have the benefit of memorizing the song, which you may already like,
Yeah.
and then performing that song back in a way that you get all these like nice pieces of feedback that allow you to like enhance your overall experience of listening to and feeling like you're performing a song, which you don't get from other arcade style games, which is probably why this is like one of the few arcade style games that actually sells as well as it does.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Because like most arcade style games don't, like there's definitely like a core appeal to a certain group of people, but like it doesn't hit like this the sort of popularity that like Beat Saber does.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that like a lot of this is there is a bit of kind of cart before the horse, where when you're building a music game, there's a measure of like every music game that you build is first a prototype that you're going to try to sell to the music companies, and it's your job as a music game developer, music game developer to convince some musicians or the labels, the rights holders, effectively, that your game is worthy of their music, and that they can turn a profit by having their music inside of your game. That they would, and that happened with Beat Saber most recently, where once once Beat Saber started to gain traction with the feel and everything, artists were looking, how do I get my music in that game? Because it looks cool. They may have played it and said this feels awesome, and also there's clearly with a user base potential for money.
And to be fair, that actually happened to Harmonix on the first Guitar Hero. The first Guitar Hero, though it had real songs, the songs that were in that game had to be performed by another artist, not the original. So they were all covers. And the reason why it was done this way is because they couldn't get permissions from the actual labels, or they could, but they'd have to pay like exorbitant costs to get like, whatever Jimi Hendrix on his actual song on it, because they have to get basically with music rights is you have to be able to get the permission from the label that owns the recording to play it, and they'll ask for huge prices or huge charges in order to get them on the platform. So Harmonix with the first Guitar Hero said, F that. There's no way we're going to be able to turn a profit on this, because they didn't know what the popularity of Guitar Hero was going to be. And they said, let's get cover artists to do all these songs. It'll be good enough, and it'll give you the experience that we're trying to sell. And by the time Guitar Hero 1 blew up, Guitar Hero 2 is when they started using the actual music, because now the labels are like, oh, we'll play ball. We'll do this.
Oh, this is making a lot of money. Okay, we're in. Yeah. And there's also there are other complications along with that as well, where you strike a deal with the music industry and they'll say things like, cool, you can use this in the game with this contract for 2 years. Then you can't sell any more games that have our copy of our music in it. Like, okay.
Yeah, it's actually a huge issue with the game industry in general, because not only has this happened with games like Guitar Hero, where it's like you can't find the old versions of that game available because of this reason, but it also happens with games like the sports games like NBA 2K, Madden, whatever, that will use like for that year's most popular songs. And then 2 years later, it's like you can find the disc version of it, but you cannot find digital versions of it because the music license rights lapsed. So either they have to patch the game and get that music out of the build, or they'll yank it from the marketplace.
And to be fair, this isn't something that's specific to the games industry. It's a complication with TV and movies as well. With TV especially, movies may have a bit of a slightly different deal that's struck, but with television, usually it's something like the rights are for the initial broadcast, and then maybe for rebroadcast for a year or two. And so you'll get things like, I think there are episodes of Seinfeld where maybe it's not, maybe it's Friends, there's some TV shows where there's certain episodes where suddenly you watch the episode, and if you have a recording from the original air date, it will be different than the rebroadcast because the music changed, and that's because they couldn't clear the music for the rebroadcast. So, being music centric with a music game can add a lot of complexity to the business side of things and trying to make that work. And that's beyond just trying to convince the musicians or the music industry that you're worthy and that they should take a bet on you.
Yeah, no, I mean that's 100% the case. I mean, not talking about any specific conversations we've had with people, but
Right.
basically,
Yep.
after Beat Saber became popular, you have record labels acknowledging that they were approached beforehand, they couldn't get out of their own way, denied it, and then missed the initial wave, and then jumped on it later. But acknowledging that like that's a problem, and broadly like outside of the music industry, it's a problem for game creators who want to make music rhythm games, who want to capitalize on the sort of feeling and all this up, like the sort of experience that makes these games so popular, and having to rely on like MIDI versions of it like that. I mean, when you go into like app stores, it's like all of them are MIDI based, all of them are using MIDI audio, not original audio, and like that's like what the piano tiles and stuff like that is. It's like they're bizarro versions of songs that they can pay very little licensing cost to get a hold of.
There's also something about that the MIDI point brings up as well, which is it is difficult. It is very time consuming and hard to make a game with music feel good. We make software that helps people do this, and a lot of people come to us, and before they look at our software and say, that looks great, can it automatically create a Guitar Hero for me? And the answer is no, because Guitar Hero, the people that made Guitar Hero, like the actual gem tracks where they line out everything and that's what you're actually hitting to, they didn't do that with an algorithm. They didn't sit down and say like, hey computer, tell me the numbers. It's why you don't put in your own music into from your Xbox or whatever and then expect all of the gems to just appear. It's all very artistically added, and it's a time consuming thing to play and then even play test and make sure that it feels right when you're playing it. There's hours that go into each single track that's on there. It takes hours of production work.
Yeah. And actually, I've written 2 articles on this now that are on our blog. Not to like give myself a blatant plug, but it's actually happened organically. And yeah, it's like I write about specifically that because MIDI is actually a useful tool for developing these games. And actually, that actually does bring a point, which is like you look at things like DDR, you look at games like Harmonic or like Rock Band and Guitar Hero and Beat Saber. And the thing that all those games have in common is that they aren't using algorithms to determine where like input placement is that goes along with the beat. It's all artistically driven. They may use algorithms to get like like initial beat track or something, but that then gets modified by like essentially someone who can go in and look at it and be like, oh, that beat's off, or this isn't right, and now we want to. Especially with like Beat Saber. Beat Saber is more about like movement feel, and making something that feels good, and they probably even have rules around like what is an impossible movement. So like don't do movements that are impossible. So like this is actually what we had at Harmonix too. We had like very specific rules that like you can't do this. This is a bad idea because it doesn't play well. So do not use this type of gem placement because the feel is bad. So
and there are all manner of this type of restriction on it. So you end up, even if you get to start with the MIDI version of the file, which is just basically digital sheet music, it's here all the notes for all the instruments. You then have to cull, because there's just, and by that I mean take away the stuff that is just extra, it's fluff, right? You don't, when you listen to a piece of music, there is so much going on typically, and you don't need all of that in those experiences to get that feeling of warmth and oneness with the music in that experience, and kind of, in fact, removing a lot of the cruft really helps you focus in on it, and that may be part of what gets you into that state of flow. Now, some musicians, some people, I mean, especially musicians, may actually like the complexity of all of that stuff, but that's not going to be for a general game playing population.
Yeah, yeah. Let's see. Is there anything else to talk about on this we haven't talked about?
Looks like it covers it pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of stuff to talk about in terms of like the development of these games. I don't know how much people actually like want to hear about it, but I mean, we do have the experience there, and we can talk at length about how music games are developed, or how they've been developed in the past, at least, and stuff of that nature. But we don't have questions from anybody, so that's what we're on for now. If anybody does have any questions for us, shoot us a message. We have we're on Twitch, obviously, but we also have you can reach us via Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Discord, which you can all find the links to on our website or in our profile or whatever else. But yeah, hit us up, ask us questions. We're more than happy to talk about like our past experience and our sort of take on the industry.
Yep.
Well, thanks everybody for watching.
All righty. See you next time.
All right. And I'm going to go watch Justice League. Snyder Cut.
The Snyder Cut. Yep.
Hey, I've heard good things so far.
There you go.
All right. Take it easy, everybody.